I would now like to invite the panel candidates up onto the stage, who include Deborah Davis from the Co-op, Lee Madden from Ernst Young, Juan Mateos-Garcia from Nesta, and Professor Jonathan Reynolds from the University of Oxford. We'll start off with just a few comments from them, and then we'll go and take it to the floor. And if you want to ask any questions or any observations of the day, that would be great. If you would like to share any key points from the day or learnings, that would be great. Deborah, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so I'm Deborah Davis. I'm from the Co-operative group and I work in location and portfolio planning. I think one of the things for me, my background in visualisation, being from location and portfolio planning, I have a massive bias towards a map. And I think that whenever you can get a map in anywhere, I think it's the best thing that you can do. There's a lot of geographers in this room that probably will agree with that. One of my colleagues said the other day that he described his job as predicting the future with a map, which I think is quite a nice way of looking at it. But aside from that, I think the really important things that we have to think about are the designs of visualizations when we're creative, and that's probably not the strong point of the majority of the analysts in the room, acknowledging that we have those weaknesses and bringing people in to help us with that, acknowledging the users, the end users, what their preconceptions are, and also considering it within the wider points of storytelling. And it's really good that a lot of those points have been picked up today, so it's good to see that everyone's thinking about similar things. I think it's been a great day, and we had some great visuals earlier on from James and Alan. I think it's nice to go back with some inspiration. We talked on our table about how some of the times you just do things in the same way because that's the way you're used to doing it, and you can see a visual from a contractor or someone that presents something to you in a different team, and you go, oh, that's really good, and then for the next couple of weeks everyone produces that type of chart because it's the new thing, the latest fact. But I'm definitely going to go back and maybe replicate and steal a couple of the ones today, and share them with my team as some really good ideas of different ways of visualizing things. I think one of my other reflections is that a lot of what we've talked about is quite simple. We've talked about designing with data, providing context, surprising people, empathy, and about just the importance of explaining a visualization so that people can pick it up and know what it is, whether that's just with a couple of annotations or just labeling your axis, which is a key bugbear of mine when people don't do that. So I think there's a lot that you can take just to improve a basic visualization from those simple points. One of the interesting things that we picked up on at the table, and I was going to ask Dame Colette this, but kind of didn't get around to us, was, and maybe throw it open to the panel as a question from me, but a wider discussion that we had on our table about the differences in lacking skills and maybe changes in mindset. So we definitely said, whilst there's a need for skills training for decision makers about analysis, some of it's a little bit of a mindset change when people who've been in the business for 30, 40 years who weren't around when some of this big data was even a thought in anyone's mind, never mind in existence, think that they know the right answer, and trying to convince them that your data and your analysis could be correct and their 40 years in the business is incorrect can be a real challenge. So I think that would be interesting maybe for everyone to sort of think about and maybe give an opinion on how much they feel it's a shift in skill rather than just a shift in skill and in mindset.
Thank you. Lee, would you like to share your comments?
Yep, so thank you. So my name is Lee, and I should say, or start by saying that prior to working in financial services, I was a philosopher, which means I've been sat here today going, why am I here today? And the question I'm actually really trying to answer is, why do I find this so interesting? And I was listening to a presentation by a managing director of a financial services company. I wanted to read you a quote from what he said, which was, "The financial crisis of 2008 can really be seen as a failure of business to manage business intelligence and data." And my immediate reaction was, God, there's nothing these banker types won't blame on the analysts. And then I read his job title, and his job title was Head of Enterprise Intelligence. And I then thought, God, he's a traitor as well. But actually the point that he is making is that data is becoming increasingly important and looked at by boards, by CFOs, by regulators, and by businesses themselves. And for me, the really fascinating thing is that a lot of these people see data analysis and understanding data as of strategic importance, but they themselves don't really understand it. So that's sort of one thought and one group of people I want to sort of just come back to in a moment. The second group of people I've been thinking about are really the younger generation, and I still probably count myself just about as part of that group. But when I think about the rise of personal data over the last sort of 10 to 15 years and how familiar people are with the likes of Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and that those companies have a huge amount of data on you, I find it very, very interesting. We saw today about the use of Twitter and demographic Twitter data and how actually powerful it can be. The interesting thing for me is that over the next 5 to 10 years, people with an entirely different upbringing and understanding and appreciation of data are going to be entering the workplace, and actually the Generation Y and Generation Zs are probably going to be quite soon becoming the decision makers that we have to work with and help influence, and that's going to bring some really, really interesting challenges. So the two observations, I think the two sort of different groups, kind of the old world and the new world, probably have you'll have very, very different ways of working with them. And at our table, we were talking about the need to be able to know who you're going to be communicating to and know how you're going to have to land the message with them. But I think that what makes the topic of today so valuable is that it is clearly very important, because what data visualization does is it gives analysts a real voice in the business and really helps communicate some very, very complex issues. And I see huge value in both the debate that we've had today and the examples that the guys have used. And no better example really for me was, for the first time I either noticed or saw that during the general election you had data maps making front page news, because that was an easy way of communicating the progress of what was actually happening day in, day out with our politicians. And I think I actually ironically don't have the data to hand, but I think this was the general election which had one of the highest levels of engagement both on social media and other formats as well. So the takeaway from me today is this is really, really important, and there's been a lot of valuable discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So hello, I'm Juan Mateos-Garcia. I work in Nesta, and it's been a great day for me. I guess we have come here from Nesta, partly as an organization who are doing this kind of work, and it's been brilliant to see all of the inspiring presentations throughout the day, as well as learning about some of the tips about having an impact. But also another reason why I've been coming here is because we have been doing a lot of research looking at access to analytics skills by UK businesses. We want to understand what do UK businesses look for when they recruit data analysts, and what's their experience in the labor market when they do this. So we have been talking about this research in many different venues. I've been presenting to many different audiences, people in marketing, people in the creative industries. A couple of weekends ago, I was even presenting to people in publishing and literature. And I guess what's really interesting is that everyone is having a very similar conversation. It's a conversation like the one we have been having here today, which is about the opportunities that are coming out as more data become available, the type of changes that need to take place inside organizations in order to be able to create value from all of this data, but also how do we get the people who are going to be creating value from this data? Because if we think about the kinds of skills and capabilities we have been discussing today, we have been talking about analytics, we have been talking about programming, we have been talking about design and visualization, we have been talking about storytelling, persuasiveness, knowing the domain, have business skills. Actually, that's a very interesting mix of skills. I mean, I think the term unicorn has been used to refer to people with these skill sets because they are a bit like a mythical creature and very hard to find. We have been also, and I think this was what we were discussing in the workshop before, hearing a lot about how different organizations are developing practices in order to find this talent, in order to train this talent, in order to decide what part of the organization to put this talent on, how to keep this talent motivated, remembering that this analytical talent, and I'm not saying this just because I'm an analyst, it's very creative. It's not mundane work, it's not routine work, it's very creative work. It needs to be managed as such, and we have heard about some of the practices to do this before. At the same time, creative work has its downsides, and we know that sometimes analysts and creative workers can fall down rabbit holes when they forget a bit about why is it that they are exploring this question and what it means for a business. So I think it's very important to find ways of managing these workers, acknowledging their creativity, but sometimes also restraining it a bit, or channeling it rather. So there's like almost like a management piece here, but the other thing that we have been thinking a lot about is, okay, what are the implications of this data revolution for education and skills policy? And actually we published a policy briefing called Analytic Britain, where we set out an agenda for change across the education system that will hopefully create a situation where we are able to get more people with these skills, including both unicorns, but also frontline workers who understand data and decision makers who understand data. And obviously, there's lots of recommendations there. It's almost too many recommendations. It's a bit of an information overload to read it, actually. But I guess just to give you a sense of the things we're covering, and that I think relate to the conversations we have been having today, we have been thinking about what happens in schools in terms of what happens inside the curriculum, but also what happens outside the curriculum. And this is an area where the Royal Statistical Society obviously have their data manifesto, and we have fully endorsed their recommendations. We have also been thinking about what happens in universities. And what happens in universities is both about increasing the quality of undergraduate courses. It's about embedding data analytics in more and more in other disciplines, following, for example, the example of the brilliant Q-STEP program. And it's also about investing on the high end, supporting things like the Center for Doctoral Trainings and so forth, so that we can truly get these advanced data scientists and machine learning experts, and also encouraging interdisciplinarity, encouraging different departments, different disciplines to come together to create these individuals with this wide range of skills that are required to create value from data. And also we have had recommendations focusing on what happens in the industry piece and also with training. And there we think it's super important to encourage more networking between different industries, because we're seeing similar problems happening, similar issues being mentioned. It's important for all of these different industries to come together and speak with one voice to policymakers and educators, and also we think there's a lot of scope for learning, for moving talent around, and so forth. And I guess this is where coming to this conference has been great and really inspiring, because it feels that in a way this agenda of change, this agenda that we are pushing with Analytic Britain, and that is now hopefully going to be implemented, and we are talking to many organizations to do this, including DAG. It's in a way about trying to scale up and systematize many of the wonderful conversations and connections that we have been seeing at the event today, both in terms of what we saw, industry coming together with university, different people from different disciplines coming together, and I guess for us, as I said, is basically what's been really great about today is seeing almost like an exemplar of what we see happening across the UK in a more systematic and scaled up way.
Jonathan?
Thank you. I mean, it's quite a nice sequence of comments here, because in a sense mine picks up from Juan's comments about universities education. Having trashed the academic profession in the commentary just now from the group work and lived up to your stereotypes of academics, I feel it's my responsibility to try and set the record straight. So I'm a geographer, and I also have maps in every presentation I do in a business school environment, although in a business school environment it's rather like putting your hand up and saying I'm an alcoholic, but it seems to work well most of the time. But my themes are around the challenges posed to the academic sector for what we've heard today. There's been some fascinating insights, but also themes around art and science. I remember Nick Penny, who was the first director of Tesco's site research unit, saying that analysts should never neglect what he called the gut feel of the retail directors, and that wasn't because Tesco directors were overfed at the time, but this was based on, I think, his first piece of analysis for the site research unit, which is about building a new store in East Glasgow. And so confident was he of the analysis that he took the entire board up in their large cars to see this site. They got out, they wouldn't get out of the car, it was too dangerous. They turned around and came back again. So that was his first lesson in balancing art and science in site location research. But I think as the day has gone on, I think I've heard some really interesting, tensions and issues that are very relevant to the academic sector as well. First, the skills required. I think absolutely right. There's a paucity of design and statistical skills in UK universities, as Juan's outlined, and we see it across the piece. But the data artist idea, which is one that Ian kind of floated, it does exist, and it is this unicorn that we've heard described. I dug out a definition. The data artist blends engineering and statistical know-how with intuition, picking up Mark's point, and novel problem-solving abilities to uncover insights and create value from data. A bit like walking on water, but whether you can get one person to do all those things, or whether you need that kind of combination that James had with his design guru this morning is a moot point. But we lack those skills in universities too. So the onus is on us to identify in the humanities, in art and design, faculties across universities, the kind of skills that we need to supplement our analytical capabilities. And there's a training education need as well within firms for that. I wonder when we'll see the first data artist in residence in a retailer, for example. The second is around data integrity. We didn't really discuss this today, but certainly it came out in our conversations around informational against persuasive use of data. And we heard Edward Tufte being mentioned in that wonderful kind of map of the retreat from Moscow, which doesn't have any empathy in it, absolutely right, but it does have a very striking impression on the reduction of the army over that time. But the book by Tufte, which contains that piece, which is a really interesting one, also contains lots of bad design of presentation and visualization of data. Much of it comes from newspapers. Much of it comes from academic analysis and from corporate analysis. So there's a lot of bad visualization around. And bad, I don't just mean badly drawn, but I mean biased, with a particular aim in mind, to persuade using other than what the data actually tells you in some senses. And I think we have to recognize that it's responsibility of academics, for example, as it is for all trusted analysts and advisors of organizations, to build trust in respect to visualization of data as much as in respect to written or oral communications within the organization. Data might be neutral, but information is not. It's not neutral or objective. Much old information and data is deeply politicized. And Dame Collette talked about the role of the news media. And clearly, we've all seen those charts and presentations, not in the FT, I hasten to add, but in other perhaps less reputable newspapers, which are seeking to put across a particular point around a political issue. Now, so-called big data, we might argue, is less inherently biased, but it has its own biases. And is much less susceptible to control. And so we have some interesting issues around how we choose to visualize that kind of information. Now, thirdly, Mark reminded us of the context for these conversations, and quite rightly, the commercial imperatives that face all of us as in our organizations, whether we're academics or whether we are practitioners, and the imperative to influence. And part of this is around timeliness. Again, from a practitioner point of view, absolutely, the speed of change has increased. Practitioners have to work much harder and work much faster and smarter, and the analytical toolkit allows us to do that much more effectively. You should try being an academic. Academic timescales are glacial in respect of projects and publications. We have to run on two different timescales if we're to be relevant to the needs of business. We have to run on the kind of academic publishing timescale, which is often a matter of years. We have to run on the commercial timescale, which is a matter of hours in some cases. And I was gratified to hear James's comment this morning that he was able to get some data, turn it into a map, get it into the book. He didn't tell us how long it then took to get the book published, but that's another kind of matter. So timeless and speed of change. Academics have to work a lot harder, faster, and be more relevant, have more impact, to be trusted partners in the challenges that we all face in this field. And so finally, the big question that always faces academics when we're invited to join audiences like this, which is the so what question. And Mark put up a couple of slides of maps and said, well, what is the commercial relevance of this? So what is always the hard question. It's often levelled at university academics and researchers. Effective visualization is perhaps one means of starting to address the so what. But does it really help answer the enduring questions and improve the quality of decision making that affect businesses? it comes back to how effective a communicator can academics be with their commercial audiences. I mentioned, not perhaps a bit trivially in my comments from the group work, sometimes problems can't be distilled to be completely simple or straightforward. The reality is that some problems are wicked, some problems are complex, but it's the responsibility of all of us to try, whether we're analysts or academics or whatever, to communicate that complexity in accessible and meaningful ways. And I think, as the person that followed me said in the conversation, and I think visualization plays a really important part in that strategy too. So it does come back to art and science, and it comes back to a question that Nick Penny posed 30, 40 years ago when he set up the Site Research into Tesco, which is about balancing art and science. And we've talked a lot about science here today. We haven't talked as much as we might do, although we've oohed and ahed at beautiful drawings and visualizations, at the way in which art and science work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments about today?
Hi, Pete Woodhouse from the Co-op. To the panels, sometimes, I'm sure it's across a lot of businesses, decision makers seem to get very hung up on exceptions, the outliers. Is there a danger that visualising could actually bring more notice to the outliers and the exceptions?
Anybody on the panel?
Yes, if as the visualizer you choose to allow it to do so. So we saw that great example from the FT this morning about taking that data on gender parity in education and turning it on its side and bringing out the information about Pakistan. Now, I don't know whether there was a Pakistani member of the advisory board that eventually helped produce that report that said, actually, I'd rather have it as a diagram that way, please, because it doesn't show in Pakistan in quite such a bad light. So again, information is power in that respect, and we have a responsibility, I think, to consider how we bring attention to certain kinds of data, and whether it's appropriate to bring attention to the exceptions that could be used to make disproportionately different decisions about things.
I'd add something to that, which was just that whenever I worked on a project recently where a large bank had an ambition to contact 35,000 customers within a 3-month period, and they wanted to have a 98% success rate. And my gut feeling was, it can't be done based on the timelines and everything else. But to get the message across that to help them understand that it couldn't be done, we showed them a graph. It wasn't a graph. We actually showed them a block chart that, because they had over 9,000 of their customers either had no address or a known incorrect address. So their perception was they were the outliers. But the reality was the outliers were actually a very significant part of the population that was actually going to stop them from reaching their goal. And we used visualization to actually show them that, because they had it written down on a 1-line bullet in a pack that was completely lost in all the other conversation and discussion that was being had. And I think I view my responsibility is communicating what the data is telling you in an effective way, not trying to hide what the anomalies are.
I think I'd follow that up and say it's a mix of picking a visualization that will accurately reflect the data and will highlight those anomalies, and not shying away from the fact that there's 1 or 2 stores. But also, if you've got a store that is underperforming, or a very anomalous piece of data, that could distort your meeting, and you could spend 10 minutes talking about why you got that wrong and actually lose the focus of the visualization. So I think when we go back to what we were talking about, context, putting that context around your visualization and saying, you know what, yes, this does point out that this one thing was wrong, but let's not spend 10 minutes talking about that. Let's focus on the rest of it, and by effectively contextualizing your visualizations, you can hopefully drag the focus back on the bulk of the data and spend less time talking about those anomalous results.
I think it's also partly about being able to explain why we see this anomalous behavior. What is it that's driving this outlier? And actually, this leads us to ask questions about the extent to which the data is of a sufficient quality. We were, a few months ago, doing a project where we were using Twitter data to try to quantify the impact on an event on the connectivity of participants, see whether Twitter could tell us something about people coming together at this event and connecting in a way that hopefully will drive information exchange, inspiration, innovation, all of that. The event had 1,500 people, and we did find that a single participant had, before the event, followed 700 of the other participants in Twitter, and just after the event finished, and followed 650 or something like that. Actually, this single individual was having a massive impact on the impact metrics we were able to generate from looking at the event. And this was an outlier, obviously. So I guess the question then became, what do we do about this guy? Do we take him out because he's obviously behaving as a... Okay, no, not physically, although we knew who he was. Remove him from the data set. Or actually, is this guy telling us something really interesting about the way in which people network these days in Twitter? He was using this platform in a different way. For example, trying to connect with people beforehand, or using other participants in the event as a channel of information about issues related to the event. And in a way, the outlier then becomes almost like something that, in a way, what was most interesting about the data set. But I think being able to, as I said, understand what is it that's happening with that outlier is the starting point of being able to unpick what's going on here. And also being able to explain to a decision maker why is it that we have that odd person, at the center of the network, and so forth.
Any more questions?
Ian Sterling, Sainsbury's. So a question for the panel, potentially also for ONS, if they're still here. Anyone here from ONS? Very good. Dame Colette talked about education of data literacy being second to actual, proper, reading literacy. And then Alan this morning had some great slides showing some statistics about people's perception of something. So teenage pregnancy, I think, was one. Against the reality. And I just kind of wonder whether there's a role for ONS or for academia to kind of do some myth busting that would achieve both ends. Over to the panel and potentially the floor.
Myth busting is great in principle, I think, but it's provided that people want their myths to be busted. That's part of the problem. So some of the examples that we heard earlier, strongly held perceptions, they're linked often to strong political views. It's very difficult to dislodge those, particularly when you've got skilled data artists working for national media who are presenting information that is reinforcing those stereotypes rather than necessarily correcting those perceptions. So yes, I think it's possible for trusted brands or intermediaries to try and set the record straight. But of course, you have to assume that people want to listen to what's being said rather than believing their own perceptions. Because perception is reality for most of us, all of us. We're not willing to see our stereotypes of the world overturned. I think that's the real challenge. But let's have a go. Absolutely.
I have one very brief thought on that, which is when I joined EY, coming from an analytics team with Barclays, I was very surprised at the relatively low level of data competency and understanding in a comparative business. And anecdotally, what I found was people were afraid of it. They found Excel intimidating. They found the outputs difficult to understand. And I think the role that data visualization can play is actually at a much either younger or earlier stage in your career is to inspire an interest and make data in itself more accessible and actually fun, because that's what a lot of it is actually very interesting and relevant and can be fun.
Can I just add a point about the perception stuff, because this is really interesting. I don't know if John Pullinger's still here. I think John talked about the Ipsos Mori work at a school once, and one of the school children said, "Then you mustn't be very good at your job then." Like the harshest critic. Like you're responsible for official statistics, and no one understands any of it. What I found fascinating about the Ipsos Mori stuff was that it was looking at national and international data. And when we gamified a census application that was around how well do you know your own local area. That really got massive engagement, and I think we got something like 250,000 people prepared to do that quiz to find out about their local area and have fun with their misconceptions. So I think you can do it. But it was really funny. My favourite thing coming out of that was I coded that quiz, and I made it deliberately difficult to score a really high score because I wanted people to be surprised by how well or you know, how little they knew their area. But what happened with it was people started sending that quiz to their counsellors saying, how well do you know the area you claim to represent? And I suddenly started to get really interested in this. I thought, wow, we've stumbled upon, you know, we just need to get Jeremy Paxman to use this. And incidentally, I quizzed him with it, and he got 36% for Finchley, but never mind. But what was interesting was that some councillors and politicians then started posting some suspiciously high scores of how well they had scored in the area quiz. And this whole idea of kind of self-reporting their own scores became quite entertaining to me because you could actually spot patterns in the self-reported scores. But it did suggest overall that if you can use this combination of visual, personal, which is like, how does this stuff relate to me, and social, because dare I say it, there's a narcissistic element to social media that works very well for generating momentum, but that's a really interesting application. Because I originally designed that quiz as a visualization thing. I didn't realize actually what I was doing was designing a data capture mechanism, because it would have been a fascinating study of it in its own right. I also, while I've got the mic, had one question for the academics, actually, which was, where do you see visualization in the academic curricula?
Well, the short answer is often nowhere. And I think I think Juan sort of hinted at this, that I think certainly those of you that can remember your academic experience, those of you who did degree programs, whatever, were probably not enormously impressed by the visualization capabilities of the lecturers. And I think there are, as I said right at the beginning, there are some real skill deficiencies in many universities. And not just skill, but kind of mindset deficiencies almost, in thinking about data in this sort of way, where I think there is some real need to provide good practice and guidance, education.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I had a
finish on a high note.
question/comment on that one, because I used to be in academia, but not anymore. I mean, to which extent is there an encouragement for academics to generate high-quality, innovative visualizations for peer-reviewed publications? Because my experience reading peer-reviewed papers is that, with some exceptions, they tend to be quite boring in terms of visualizations. And they're also static visualizations rather than dynamic visualizations, because they have to be available in a static format.
That's right. The constraints of publication often mean that you can't have animations, you can't have colour, so it's really very dull.
Hi, my name is Roland Beert, and I'm also from the Royal Statistical Society. And I've got a feeling we need to get better at our PR here, because actually the RSS is doing lots of work in the area of statistical literacy.
Excellent.
Especially around key decision makers. So, for instance, one of the things that many people clearly don't know is that in 2 weeks' time we have World Statistics Day, and on World Statistics Day we as the RSS are actually going into Parliament to deliver a workshop in basic statistical literacy to 25 MPs. And so we think this is really important, because actually MPs are key decision makers. It's not just about MPs, it's also about their staff, their research staff, who actually write the briefing for MPs. And so actually we'll have a workshop with research staff as well to really try to instill to them the very basic skills around when you see a number, when you see a percentage, how do you interpret it, what do you need to do with it, how does it fit with the policy decisions. So that's just one example. I can give like 5 other examples, all the way from working with the DFE around the school curriculum around statistics and how statistics should be taught in the school curriculum, not just in mathematics, but outside mathematics and different other subjects as well, because data are becoming more and more important across a whole range of subjects. And for instance, another example I can give is we have lots of training workshops for journalists, because again, journalists are key intermediaries between statisticians and the general public in terms of making clear how the numbers fit with society. So that's just a few examples of the work we do, but statistical literacy is one of our 4 core aims for the society, and we put lots of work into this. If you check our website, you'll see it's one of the 4 aims that we actually step up and actually deliver quite good work, I hope. Rather a comment than a question.
Hi, Glenn Watson from ONS. Can I just go back to Ian's question, because you invited an ONS response from the floor, and I'm pleased that Roland actually mentioned the RSS work there, because of course the ONS and the RSS work closely together on a lot of these things. But I mean, and I don't think you mentioned the Get Stats campaign, did you? Which is another big part of the RSS's efforts to try and improve people's understanding of an interpretation of statistics. 2 or 3 other things I'd mention from the ONS point of view, though. One is we put an increasingly large number of people onto the telly and onto the radio to explain the statistics when we release them now, much more so than we did 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's quite a scary thing for statisticians to do, going into a TV studio and answering questions, but there's a growing body of people that do that, and you might see them popping up. I mean, I, for example, get the chance every 3 months or so to go onto the Steve Wright show and get 10 minutes or so to talk to Steve Wright about statistics. And each time the press office scare the hell out of me, because they tell me 8 million people listen to that. And I think just sort of getting people out there into the media talking about statistics helps it become normal, helps people sort of become familiar with it and not scared by it. And we do other things as well. We offer training courses to BBC journalists, for example, because if you can train the media to understand and interpret the numbers better, then so does everybody else by association. So, I mean, I think there's lots more we could do, and there's lots more the RSS could do, and there's lots more that other people in this room could do as well. But I think there's quite a lot of proactive activity to try and improve people's ability to interpret data. Can I just finish with a question, though, as well, which is for the panel. Dame Colette left us with the comment over to you in terms of how can we, in this room, collectively improve decision makers' ability to interpret data. So can I ask each of the panel members one idea, one thing, one point that you want to make on what we as a community can do to try and improve data numeracy, literacy amongst decision makers?
I'll go first and do the classic consultancy thing of nicking someone else's idea and playing it back. But I really can't overemphasize how important it is to get first-hand in a commercial world experience of working with data. And someone mentioned going on cross-business secondments. And whenever I've had people work for me and go away and spend even 4 weeks, 5 weeks actually manipulating real data and coming back to the team having had first-hand experience of that, the transformation and competence is often, it's extreme, and it gives them the self-confidence to go away and do more analysis themselves and present and talk about it confidently. And I think that although that was something else that came up from someone else in the room, I think it is extremely important, and it's something that I've seen benefit both myself and other colleagues. I think if we all went away and encouraged other people to do that, it would go a long way to helping.
I think as well, business has a responsibility to work with academia on this, because there's been a lot of pushing back and saying you're not producing the unicorns that we need. But actually, we're quite lucky at the Co-op that we do take someone in every year on a sandwich course and give them a year of our time and investment to train them up. They don't always come back to us after they've finished their degree, but giving people those opportunities and opening up, which really ties into your point of giving people opportunities to play with that data, because the more that we as business can go into schools and present to students or go to universities and set them a project to go away and work on, the more that people can understand how important those skills are and maybe be enthused to work in that area and gain those skills, and working alongside academia to help them understand what we as businesses need to get into their skill set through their normal sort of teaching methods.
I mean, just to be rather stuck record, the other two speakers, I'd absolutely agree but that commercial insight that's really important for academics isn't just about students. It's also about, we heard this morning around the MSc projects, but for full-time academics as well, to to continually understand the changes that you're facing in your businesses. Mark talked to us about the massive transformational change, so that the kind of insights we can provide are informed by those pressures for more effective decision making about more complex problems. At the moment, the kind of the disconnect sometimes is astonishing between commercial interests and academic interests. I think we both have responsibilities to work harder to bridge the gap between the two.
So for us, I guess there's lots of opportunities to innovate with data, to use new methods, to visualize data in new ways. But sometimes as an analyst, it's really easy to fall in love with the method itself, or with the data you're collecting, or with the tool you're using, and you end up making a presentation to a decision maker which is about that, instead of about the actual question that you're addressing. And I've done that before, and hopefully I've learned. I've seen people's eyes glaze over when I talk about web scraping or whatever. And I guess it's just moving away from that tech-driven way of presenting what we do, to presenting things more in a way that's much more focused on the issue or the question. And actually, if you're going to be talking about innovation in data or innovation in method, is by explaining why this thing you're doing now allows you to do something that you couldn't do before with the data that you had access to before. And actually, that's where you can start to have a much more, I think, constructive conversation about the added value of the work you're doing, as compared to being in a situation where people are blinded with science and you completely lose them.
And that reminds me of one of my very first pieces of consultancy, which was in the first days of GIS, doing a pitch to a marketing director that probably better remain nameless, to demonstrate the new mapping system that was available. And the only comment that he had at the end was, could he have a map of his home area so he could put it on the wall in his study? So I clearly failed to influence him as a decision maker completely.
It's funny you say that, because the one thing that I meant to say but I've forgotten to was, if you're going to get someone inspired by working on data, get them to do it about their own data set. And I remember the first time whenever I opened iTunes and found that it had recorded every single song I'd listened to and how many times, finding out what my top 10 songs were. I was like, my God, I was absolutely amazed, and it told me something about how much I liked 1990s progressive trance music that I didn't quite know.
Unfortunately, we have to hold on any other questions, but I'd like to ask the panel to stay seated, and I'm going to pass it over to Keith to present the Doug Award.